Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are doing a full review of A Killing Frost by Seanan McGuire, the 14th book in the October Daye series. Before we jump into the review, I do want to let you know that the first part of this review is non-spoilery. So if you have not read this book, even if you haven't read this series, you should be just fine. There will be a section at the end that does contain spoilers, but I will let you know when we get there, so that you can go ahead and click away if you want to. But let's go ahead and jump right in. The October Daye series is an adult urban fantasy series that follows our main character of October Daye. And she is half fae and she is half human, and she is a knight and a hero in the fairy realms. And that means not only is she asked to solve some really weird problems, but she is actually obligated to. But that's okay because she's really good at doing it. And in this particular book, there is a person that has gotten lost, and due to some really interesting fairy laws regarding weddings, she needs to go and find this person. I know it's super vague, and the reason is because I'm trying to not spoil the previous books, but that's the gist of this particular book. So let's jump right in and talk about world building. So this series is honestly a masterpiece of world building. It is so real and so interesting. It feels like I just lack the ability to see fairy in our own world. Like, it feels like it really should exist, right? And I think that that is so awesome. And every single book really builds on this world and introduces new and interesting things. Now, this book didn't actually give us so much new stuff. Like, there wasn't any real new history or backstory or places to explore. But what it did was actually go back and fill in some details. It solved some mysteries. It answered some questions. And so we ended up adding detail to this already very detailed picture of this world. And it was so good. And I just really enjoyed it. A lot of this stuff that we filled in it just fit really, really well. Like, to the point where I am curious to know if Seanan McGuire knew all of these details going into the first book, because that's how well it fit. And I'm just like, okay, so either she did a massive amount of planning before the first book, or she is amazing at figuring out the world building stuff so that it fits so nicely together. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think it was amazingly well done. Next, let's talk about the plot. Now, the plot is where I had a few issues, and some of them are really just me issues, and I recognize that. But I did want to let you know that we'll be talking about them. But first off, let's just say straight out, the plot is very solid. There is definitely some things that it set out to do that for this book, but as well as for this series, and it did it very well and in an interesting sort of way. Now, the premise of this book I didn't love, but also I can't really fault it because it feels real for the world. Like, the reason that she has to go track down this person, it feels real, and the motivations behind people telling her about it feels very real. Like, all of it feels very real. It feels very everybody is in character, all of that kind of stuff. The reason that it didn't really click with me is just because this book felt almost inevitable. So when this person got lost earlier in this series, I was just like, oh, you're gonna have to go find them. And at the end of that book where this person got lost, Toby did say she was eventually going to go find them. But I was just like, it's going to be much sooner than you want. Like, you're probably thinking in years. You're going to have to do it soon. So I already knew that. Now, before she could actually find this person, there was also a condition that needed to be met. And I knew that condition was incredibly important for the rest of the series. Just in my heart of hearts, I knew it. And so even that wasn't really it felt very inevitable. Of course she has to go find this person. Of course she has to meet this condition. of course we're going to do it in this book. And so so the plot kind of lost a little bit of its luster with that because it did feel so inevitable. Now, usually when that kind of thing happens with Seanan McGuire, there's twists and turns that make it interesting along the way. And this one, I think that the problem I had was there was a big mystery that was solved. And that was good. However, when we got to the reveal of that mystery, that solution to the mystery, I'm assuming that there were clues left along the way because Seanan McGuire leaves a lot of clues along the way. She really doesn't do things haphazardly. But I didn't pick them up. And so when we got to that point where we solved this mystery, it felt very thin to me and it didn't really feel proper, and I didn't really appreciate it, honestly, because I didn't pick up all the clues that would make me feel like this is the correct solution, if that makes sense. So I'm assuming, so obviously all of this is personal stuff. That's just me not picking up on clues that I'm pretty sure that the author left behind is a me problem. But I wanted to highlight it because I think that the clues are going to be there, but a little bit hidden. So with that, I do think that I'm going to enjoy it more on a reread with just this book, but also rereading the books where the clues would have been left, I think will also help. But other than that, I do think that it's a pretty good plot, and it I don't have other complaints about it. So there you go. Next, let's talk about the characters. So I love the characters in this book. They're well fleshed. We're in the 14th book, right? So these characters are very well fleshed out. We're not really introducing a whole lot of new characters at this point. And even in this book, usually we'll pull some people from the background forward and kind of find out more about them. But we didn't do as much of that in this book. We also didn't really have a whole lot of relationship development other than Toby and her significant other. Now, what we got with Toby and her significant other, I do think is very good because it's rough to be in a relationship with a hero, right? Because Toby, not only is she inclined to try to solve these impossible problems, she's actually obligated to because she is a named hero of the fairy realms. She has to do it. And that means that she's going off on these quests that could very much kill her. Now, and it's really hard to be in a relationship with somebody like that. And we watch her significant other really struggle with this. The fact that he really wants her to be safe, that he wants to be able to spend, as all these years just being with her, and it could very easily be cut short right now. But also he's conflicted because he understands her obligation and her duty, and he's not going to stop her. And so that kind of push and pull in his own feelings, but also as they deal with each other, is incredibly interesting. And I thought it was really interesting to watch the exploration of that in this particular book. But other than that, we didn't get a ton of relationship development, although honestly that's enough. But in any case, what we did actually get were some big events that happened in this book that are going to have a lasting impact on our characters. Going to change their worldview, going to change their relationships with others. And it wasn't even just one big thing, it was multiple big things. And so we are seeing the events in this book, and I know that in the next book we're going to see the aftermath and how they're dealing with it and how they're changing to really take in the knowledge that things have changed and how they've changed. So I do like the characters, and I just don't think there was quite as much done with it. Other than the relationship with Toby and her significant other, there just wasn't as much done with it in this particular book. Next, let's talk about pacing and writing style. So the pacing, as always, was very fast. This is a very fast-paced series. The writing style, again, solid. Seanan McGuire has honed her writing craft to the point where it's just good. One scene easily leads into another. It's just really easy reading. It's very engaging, and like it's one of those things where you can easily sit down and start reading, stop, look up at the clock, and realize multiple hours have passed because it flies, and it pulls you in. Next, let's talk about the diversity. Now, we haven't talked about this so much in this particular series of reviews, but I did want to mention it. This particular series is amazing for the diversity of queer folk. Like, it feels like basically every fae that we run into is some flavor of bisexual, so that's really interesting. There is a trans character who had a lovely coming out story earlier in the series. We do have also a character who is a wheelchair user and also happens to be a mermaid, which I adore. And we do have mental health issues come into play quite frequently in this book as well. Nothing diagnosed, because that's like they're fae. They're not going to go to a human therapist to be diagnosed, but it is very clear that multiple characters are dealing with some pretty heavy mental health stuff. The one big thing that is severely lacking is the diversity of race and ethnicity, and there is a reason for that, which I got into a little bit more in depth in the introduction into this series of reviews. I'll leave it linked up above, down below somewhere. But essentially, how Seanan McGuire set up the mythology in the first book is very, very Western European, and there's not really a way to include fae of other race and ethnicities without it being racist as crap. So, and like by the time it was realized that that's what it was, the first book had already been published, so she couldn't really go back and change canon. And so what it means is that instead of making it terribly racist by including the racial and ethnic diversity in the fae, she basically chose the path of do less harm, which is they're just mostly not included, which I don't like, but I understand the reasonings behind it. So, but I did want to mention that. Also, I need to mention as a content warning, this book has self-harm. It is part of Toby's magic. She does heal very quickly, but it's all up and it's a thing. It's less of a thing in this book, but this series is like a nightmare of self-harm. So just a heads up. And then the last thing you should know about this book is that this is part of a series and should not be read as a standalone. Honestly, if you tried to read this as a standalone, I am not entirely certain how you could enjoy it, because a lot of the stuff with this book has to do with the payoff of having built to these big reveals, and it's not going to mean anything to you if you haven't read the previous books in this series. So it's not a standalone. Please don't read it as a standalone. But other than that, I really did enjoy this stories. I know I had my issues with the plot, but honestly, everything is still just so good. It is so enjoyable. And I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. So that concludes my non-spoilery section. We are going to get into spoilers. So if you do not want to be spoiled for this book, you should definitely click away now. Bye. Okay, so here's the deal. We had huge reveals, right? First, Oberon is back. That was actually the part that I really had struggled the most with, was how Toby was able to figure out that Officer Thornton was Oberon. Mostly because, like, I just didn't pick up any, like, the only thing she was banking on was Officer Thornton saying, "let alone lady," to her. And I'm like, really? Okay, there has to be more clues than that. However, seriously, Toby, you're banking on, you give up your way home to do that? Like, seriously? Okay, little thin, not okay. But obviously this is going to have a huge impact once it comes out. Now, everybody obviously is like, we got to keep this secret. And I'm like, that's great. You're definitely going to try to keep it a secret, but let me know how that goes, because I'm banking on it coming out in the next book. So maybe 2 books if we're lucky. But it's going to be just huge. It already is huge as the Lushak is reacting to being able to be with her dad after like 500 years. Obviously, also Oberon was really helpful in the divorce proceedings when he was holding Amandine back. So I just think it's going to be incredibly interesting to watch what happens with Oberon. So speaking of divorce proceedings, oh my gosh. So Simon finally standing up to Amandine. I was just like, yes, yes, this is awesome. Thank you so much for finally just like deciding you needed out of this marriage because she clearly doesn't love you. But the fact that they had also, okay, so just as a tangent, well, not total tangent, but anyway, Amandine being like, I object because I did nothing wrong. He should not be allowed to divorce me because I did nothing wrong. It's like, I sat there and just stared at that for a while. I was like, you are so entitled. Like, it just gives me pause how entitled you are. And I love the Lushak's response. Like, that's nice. That's not a valid objection. But the fact that neither August nor October stood with her, like chose their mother's line is incredibly interesting. Again, that's going to have huge impacts, not just on like being claimed and legally connected to Simon, but also how is Amandine going to deal with the rejection of both her husband and her 2 children. I think that'll be really interesting to see what happens with her. And then, of course, the marriage right after. And, like, obviously that's going to hurt Amandine as well. Not only did, like, she get divorced, she lost her kids, but he immediately got married. Like, it'll be really interesting. And, of course, like, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Simon grows as a person when he's with people who actually love him. So I'm really intrigued to see all of that kind of play out. And as a side note, I am intrigued also by, like, what is May's legal status? Because she wasn't forced to declare at the divorce proceedings. So, like, she's not a kid of Amandine and Simon. So whose is she, right? That'll be really interesting, I think, to find out. And I think it'll become important later. But then the last big thing that happened that's going to change a lot of stuff going forward is the downfall of Sylvester and Luna. So obviously Luna opened the Rose Road up for Toby, and the price that she named for doing this is that Toby has to never come back to Shadowed Hills. She is effectively banished. And the fact that Simon did not stand up to his wife, he once again chose somebody other than Toby, even though standing with Toby would have been the right thing to do. I think we are seeing the downfall of Luna and Sylvester. I think that this is going to be the linchpin. I don't think that there's any way to really save them. At least Luna. I do think I'm intrigued to see if this is going to be just Luna's downfall or if it's like actual like villain origin story kind of territory. And I'm intrigued to see if Sylvester goes down with that sinking ship, or if he ends up pulling away and just letting Luna fall on her own. But I mean, this is big stuff, not just because like it really breaks the relationship between Sylvester and Toby, but also because I think it's going to be really important that it effectively breaks the relationship between the High King and Queen and Sylvester, which obviously Quentin reminded him of, like, by saying, you banish my knight, you're banishing me. If you're banishing me, I can't finish my education. If I can't finish my education here, I'll go to Kingdom in the Mists. But that also means that you don't get the same favor that you were getting by being where I have my fosterage. And I think that break in that relationship is also going to be very, very important. And I can't wait to see how. It makes me really sad. It really does. But at the same time, I think it is so interesting and so intriguing. And I really want to see how all of this kind of plays out. But that is it, you guys. Those are the big things that I had feelings about that are spoilery. If you have read this, let me know down in the comments. Come talk to me about this because I love this series so much. But that is it. So until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.